Alright, so Chapter 8 deals with structural items. Essentially, we're going to consider structural items to be the primary structure of the building: columns, footings, bearing walls, roof trusses, things of that nature. And just like we went through and created levels to organize our models vertically, we're going to create structural grids to organize them horizontally. And that's the way you need to think about structural grids. Then we're going to place some columns in there, which will teach us about inserting components and how to size things properly. And then finally we'll talk about some footings and some other items. So a lot of the ideas that we're covering in some way should be review. And a lot of the things you're learning don't just apply to structure. They apply to how you work with these types of elements within Revit. Does that make sense? All right, I got a bunch of nods, so let's get right into it. And we're going to add a structural grid. Item 1, in the project browser, go to level 1 floor plan. Make sure you aren't in the level 1 ceiling plan. So we'll start here. And right now, we've got a nice footprint, but there's really nothing that organizes this, right? There's nothing to tie it down to. The grid system is going to be not only an organizational system, but a way for everything to be tied down. So the first thing the contractor typically does once they're got the grading done and the building pad set is they set the corners of the building and they string the grids. Then everything else comes off those grids. The underground plumbing, the walls, so you can really think of those grids as a fixed element that really helps not only through construction but in design as well. All right, item 2, zoom in the east wing's radial entry. Item 3, the data panel that holds the level and grid tools appears on both the architecture and structure tabs. On the data panel, the structure tab, click the grid button as shown in figure 8.1. So I'm going to go to structure here, and you'll see that there's both the level, which is grayed out because I can't put a level inside a level. The grid is not grayed out. And I'm going to click on grid. All right, so we're back. This is the grid icon you want to click. It's going to take you in to a context menu that is modify place grid, and you have some options. You can pick a line, you can draw a line, you can draw an arc, but you see there's other options that we've been using that you don't have. Like, you can't draw a circle and make it a grid. Not that I can think of any good reason why you'd ever want to, but there's not a tool here to do it with. You'd have to have 2 arcs put back to back if you really wanted to do that. Item 4, on the draw panel of the Modify Place Grid tab, click the Pick Lines icon. Item 5, pick the center line of the north wall. See figure 8.2. So what that did is that gave us a grid. In fact, it gave us grid line number 1. And when we go to put in the next grid, it will automatically assume that that is grid line number 2, whether we want it to be or not. All right. The grid bubble needs to be moved. Press Escape twice or click the Modify to clear the command and select the grid bubble. Notice the round blue grip similar to that in figure 8.3. So we did that. We just grabbed the grip right here, and you can move this back and forth, much like we did levels. You also have this little break right here, just like we did in levels, and it will add a break. So you should be familiar with kind of all this stuff because it works just like it did with levels. Item 7, pick that round blue grip and drag the column bubble to the right about 50 feet as shown in figure 8.4. We've done that. On the data panel, click the grid button again. Let me escape out of it. So, structures. I'm going to go to architecture and click grid, just to show you they're the exact same tool. Just because they're on different panels doesn't mean it's a different tool. Alright, on the draw panel, click the pick line icon if it's not picked already. Pick the core center of the interior wall that terminates at the exterior wall as shown in figure 8.5. So this is Looking to do that right here in this wall. Maybe turn this to course. And we have another grid. I'm going to take this and drag it out. So it's out there and snaps. I'll do the same thing here. I'm just going to do this as we go along to clean these up. So those were pretty easy, right? Alright, so that takes us through items 1 through 4. Being able to pick lines is certainly an advantage, but you won't always be in a situation where you have geometry in place to do so. In the following procedure, you'll add grid 3 by picking 2 points. Click the grid button on the architecture tab. I'm already actively in the command, so we're here. Pick a point along the center reference plane as shown in figure 8.6. Okay, so we're going to draw a line. We're literally going to pick a point here and pull this out. So we didn't have to have anything in place. Now, since it was a reference plane, I probably could have used the pick line tool, but the objective was to show you that you could draw these in place as well. I guess what we'll do is we'll move all these just a little bit further out, so we're out of the way of that elevation marker. Okay, so if you end up with a different number, it may be that you have added some grids that you're not aware of somewhere. And if it doesn't let you change the number, so example, if I come in here and want to change this to number 5, no problem, it'll let me do it. If I want to change it to number 2, it's going to tell me that a grid has to have a unique name. You can't have 2 number 2 grids. That would defeat the whole purpose of grids. So it's likely that you have, and you can see it highlighted the existing grid and the grid that I'm trying to name it in orange. So when you put it in there, Gabrielle, make sure that that you don't have a grid in there that you don't want. We're going to renumber grids here real shortly in the book. There's something there somewhere. All right. Yeah, you can add a grid without realizing it real easily. You know, it's probably caught up or underneath the same grid you already have. That can happen. All right, where were we in the book? Add grids 4 and 5, the exact opposite side of the east wing. All right, you could go in and click those, but you can also mirror them. So I'm going to mirror them. If you choose to mirror them, see, you put this as grid number 4 and this is grid number 5. Well, that's a problem, right? We want this to be for number 4 and this to be number 5. And if I come in here and name this number 4, it's going to give me an error. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to name this number 6 for the moment, so that I can name this number 5. So I can come back here and name this number 4. And then I have the grids in the order that I want them in. I'm going to pause and let you guys get all of that. These are easy horizontal grids. We have some grids that we're going to put in this rounded portion of the building that are not so simple. But they're not that hard to draw. So on the Architecture tab, click the Grid button if it's not already selected. So go Architecture, Grid. Item 2, pick the center of the radial wall. Well, they're already assuming that the draw line is there. So the best way to pick the center of this wall is type in SC. You'll see when I roll over that, the center comes up. All right, now I want my first grid to be at 45 degrees. But 6 certainly doesn't work, right? So we want to renumber this grid to 2.1. And what that does is, this is a minor grid, right? It's between grids 2 and 3. We're going to name it 2.1. I'm going to do the same thing here and mirror the grid that way. And 2.2 doesn't work. But you can see that Revit is trying to anticipate what you're going to name the next grid. It doesn't know that I'm going to name this 3.9. But it tried to help me out there. Would you agree? Alright, so go ahead and put these two grid lines in. The next thing we're going to do is add a grid line here and a grid line here. So I'm going to do that by going to grid, pick line, I'm going to pick the center line. I'm going to drag that out, and you can see that it's made this grid line 3.10. I'm going to do the same thing here. And this one hasn't made anything. So I'll turn the head on by clicking here. It really doesn't want to. Okay, so we all know this computer has a little bit of a glitch, right? Where it's kind of, you got to be right in the right spot until that turns purple. On my computer, your computer shouldn't be as picky. So we'll turn it on that side and off on that side. And now we have two more grids that we need to renumber. We'll renumber this grid here, 3.1. And we'll renumber this grid up here. Seems to be locked for some reason. 2.9. Alright, so to clean this up a little bit, we're going to add an elbow and pull that up, give us a little bit more room. And I mistakenly made it 2.9, so go ahead and make it 2.10. And then on this side, same thing, add an elbow. That just makes it more legible, easier to work with. Alright, the next step is to add the vertical grids. That will go this way, because really, structural elements tend to happen at the intersection of grids. So we're going to adding vertical grids. The only real issue with adding vertical grids is the number versus lettering issue. Because Revit continues the sequencing from the horizontal grids, make sure that when you add your first grid going in the opposite direction, you renumber or rename the first occurrence of the grid. The objective of the next procedure is to create a grid pattern running vertically across the view. Item 1, zoom out so you can see the entire east wing. Item 2, on the Datum panel of the Architecture tab, click the Grid button. Item 3, on the Draw panel of the Modify Place Grid tab, click the Pick Lines icon. Item 4, pick the center line of the west exterior wall of the east wing. You can see it did exactly what the book told us. It continued numbering it, but we don't want these to be numbers, we want these to be letters. So, and you want to do this at your first grid, so when you add the next 10, they're alphanumeric and not numeric. Item 5, when you pick the wall, the grid is added, but it doesn't have the name or number you want. You'll change that, but first pick the rounded blue grip and drag the bubble up as part of the dimensions are shown. So we've already done that and cleaned up our grid. Press Escape. Select the new vertical grid in the bubble and rename it A, as we've done. Next, you'll duplicate this grid. Because you have an arsenal of modify commands under your belt, the best way to duplicate this grid is to copy it as shown in the following steps. Select grid A. Escape. Select grid A. On the Modify Grid tab, click the Copy button. Copy button. On the Options bar, make sure that multiple checkbox is selected, which is this box right here. Pick a base point along the grid line within the wall. It's right here. Copy grid A to the wall center line seen in figure 8.17. The grid's lines auto sequence as you go. Right, so we're going to drop a grid here and a grid here and a grid. Do they want a grid there? Yeah, it looks like they want a grid there and a grid here. And you can see that we have A, B, C, D, E. Does that match up with our book? Yes, correct. And they want one here at the end point. And what I'm going to do is come back and just adjust all these so that they line up. Okay. So those were all pretty easy, right? The next one's not going to be so simple. We're going to add a radial grid line, which is kind of rare, but occasionally you might need to be able to do this. So item 1, zoom in on the radial entry of the east wing. Click the grid button on the architecture tab if the grid command isn't currently running. It's not, so we'll click grid. Item 3, on the draw panel, click the pick lines button as shown in figure 8.19. Pick lines, okay. Type an offset value of 6 inches. So just like we offset lines or anything else, we can offset grids. And the reason for this is we really want the columns to be inside that wall. Or on the inside, on the interior of that wall. Inside the wall is a bad term. Pick the finished inside face of the radial wall. Make sure the alignment indicated where the grid will go. The grid bubble lands on a congested area. Fix that by adding an elbow and adjusting the bubbles as shown by grid G near the top of figure 8.20. So we're going to click here. We're going to turn the grid on here. We're going to add an elbow. And we're going to pull that up. On this side, I'm just going to turn the grid bubble off. And it's not pretty, real congested, but we do have a grid line now here in the inside of our radial wall. So the next step is to add actual structural columns. And because we've set all our grids up, it actually becomes very easy to place these columns. And we want to lock our columns down to grids in case that grid moves, the column should move with it. So let's look at the book. The hard part is over. Determining where to put the columns is more difficult than physically placing them in the model. But of course, there are rules to follow as well as rules you need to bend in order to accomplish the results you want to see. This next series of procedures includes adding structural components to the model and placing framing systems in areas where a structural engineer may defer to the architect for structural integrity, given the design intent. To add columns to the model, follow these procedures. In the project browser, go to level 1. We're already there. Zoom into the radial entry area in the east wing. We also happen to already be there. On the Structures tab, choose Column, Structural Column. So this is a new tool. We haven't used this yet. Structure. It's under Structures tab. Column. And what you're going to see here in the Properties dialog box is a couple things. It tells us the type of column, and if we click here, we can use different types of columns. Right now we only have 2 loaded. We're going to load one here in a second. Tells it, gives it a constraint, should it move with the grid. By default, that's checked. Top connection and base connection, kind of like the top and base of a wall. We'd probably want to constrain the top and base of a column. And then it gives us some volumes and things, but these things don't count until we actually have a column in place. Alright. So back to the book here. Click the Load Family button as shown in figure 8.22. So we haven't done this yet either. Have we? We haven't loaded a family, have we? No. So load families. Families are basically those like intelligent blocks like we spoke about earlier this semester. But you're going to do this for all sorts of things, not just structural columns. So we're going to hit load family, and it's going to pull us into the standard stuff that was with Revit. So we're going to navigate to U.S. Imperial Structural Columns Still. So we're at U.S. Imperial already. Structural Columns Still. And then there's all sorts of different types of columns. There's wide flange columns and C-channels and tube still. So typically your structural engineer will kind of indicate what you want to use here. For our purposes today, what we're going to use is, in the still folder, browse to the hollow structural section column.rfa. Alright, so this is a family. And when you open this is a little bit different than typical families, because there's essentially a family type for every size standard available still. So you don't probably need every single size of still loaded into your project. It would bog your project down. They're going to ask you to load the particular size. And for our purposes, item 8 tells us that we want to use an HSS 6x6x5/8. Essentially, that means that this tube still column is 6 inches by 6 inches, so square, and the steel in it is 5/8 of an inch thick. So we'll go right here to 6x6x5/8. We're going to hit OK. And you're going to see the picture over here changed. And you're going to see when if I click here, that now I have hollow structural columns and those sizes, wide flange columns and those sizes. Alright, on the options bar, make sure the height is set to roof. So we're going to take this and say the height should go to the roof. These are tall, slender columns that we're placing right now. Place the column at grid intersection F-1. You'll see when you get close to there, it's going to want to snap. Columns like to live on grid lines. Press escape twice. Item 3, choose column, structural column on the architecture tab. Same command as if you did it through the structures tab. Does that make sense? And it's going to by default load the last family that you were using. Place a column in grid F2. Before you place this column, be sure the height is set to roof. Height is set to roof. And we're going to go to F2. Place another column at the intersection of F and G. Well, we have a little bit of a problem here, don't we? Do F and G intersect? Alright, so if you have a situation where G doesn't actually extend to F, we're going to escape out. We're going to fix this so that this works for us. We need to select this button right here. Come on. And we just need to get that to where it goes out past there. Now we'll go back to column. So architecture, column, structural column. And we'll be able to put it in the intersection. Now we may have to go and clean this up a little bit. And we can do that. Like so. Ideally this bubble ends up on that side. But that got us where we needed to go to do this column. Alright. Click modify, select the column you just placed at FG. Okay. So we just placed this column. In the Properties dialog box, make sure the top level is set to up to roof. And it is. Good. Setting the column's top level to extend to roof. We already did that. All right. Number 9. Mirror the 3 columns to the opposite side of the entry. So we're going to select this column, hold down the control key, select this column, hold down the control key to select that column, mirror, pick axis, and we're going to pick that reference plane from earlier, and everything should, if it's mirrored properly, drop where we want it to. That's the beauty of a building that is symmetrical. Let's add some full height columns at the rest of the grid locations. You'll begin with the radial grid and then place the rest of the columns in the walls of the exterior and corridor. Here are the steps. On the Structures tab, click the Column button. And he only has you going back and forth between the Structures tab and the Architecture tab to illustrate to you that it is the same command. So don't get confused. You can always use the Structures tab if you want, or you can access it through the Architecture tab. It's the same command. On the options bar, be sure the height is set to roof. It is. Hover your cursor over the grid intersection of G 2.1. The column's there, but it's the wrong orientation. Press the spacebar on your keyboard and the column rotates to align with the grid. So as I hover right there, when it's aligned with that grid, I want to place it. Easy enough, right? So Revit also knows that typically columns are parallel and perpendicular to a grid. They're not askew. Repeat the steps for columns 3 and 3.9. So I'm just going to come down here to 3. Obviously now it's in the wrong orientation, but if I hit the space bar, it should be in the right orientation. And then 3.9, do the same thing here. And there you go. Now you have these 3 columns. I'll pause there. All right. Now you'll place columns in the main part of the wing. Place a column at every grid location. Note that you must stretch the column lines to the left side of the wing. You should also turn on grid bubbles at the west and south sides of the building, as shown in figure 8.28. So that's easy enough to do. I've already stretched them because when I placed them. If I wanted to turn on bubbles, I could come in and turn on bubble by selecting that button. I don't particularly like to have bubbles on both sides of my grid lines. I think it makes the drawings more busy than they need to be. So I'm going to leave them off, but if you'd like to add the grid bubbles, please feel free to do so. So we'll move on to the next step. Now you'll place columns in the main part of the wing. Place a column, we did that. Add a column. To add a column by intersection, follow these steps. Start the structural column command. So I'll go to Structure, Column. On the Modify Place Structural Column tab, click the At Grid buttons. Okay? Which brings us into kind of a sketch mode type situation. Pick a window around the rectangular portion of the wing from right to left. Okay, so we've got all the grids picked. The Modify Place Structures column at Grid Intersection tab changes to allow you to either finish or cancel. After you have the window placed, click the Finish button on the multiple panel as shown at the top of figure 8.30. And what happened, even though it's hard for you to see at this point, is it put columns at all those locations. Now this is really great, except do we have a problem? Yeah, there's columns going down the corridor. We're going to have to come back in and modify these columns. But it's a good way to place a lot of columns very quickly. I'm going to hit pause, make sure. Alright, so obviously by placing all of the columns at the intersections of the grids, we're going to end up with columns that maybe aren't in exactly the right place. So we can modify those things. Item 1, zoom in the middle of the east wing of the corridor intersection. Select the two columns to the left of the corridor shown in figure 8.31. So this column and that column. Move the columns 4 foot to the left. And that puts them in a wall, right? Now I can either move these columns 4 foot to the right, or I can mirror these about that. Modify those any way that you feel comfortable.
The offset tool doesn't work.
Offsetting a column?
Yeah.
No, because it doesn't know which way you want to offset it. Alright. And just to show you guys that what we've actually done, I'm going to take this into 3D view so you can see these outside columns. So that is the element right there. Goes from top to bottom. Now we're going to fix this here in a few minutes, possibly in the next class. But we are, remember, drawing in 3D all the time, even if we're only constrained to a 2D plane. So I'll go back to level 1 floor plan. And there we are. All right, so the next item is using structural framing. And the architect doesn't create a lot of this structural framing. Normally the structural engineer does. But we're going to create some canopies out over here. Alright. Item 1, in the project browser, go to the level 2 floor plan. It's level 2. Zoom into the radial entry area. Select the column F1 and F5. These are the columns outside the buildings. Alright, so we want to select this column. And we want to select this column. And we're going to change the height of those columns by using our property dialog box. In the property dialog box, set the top level to level 2. Oh, that was base level. Don't make that mistake. Top level, level 2. And all of a sudden, you can't see them anymore. Why not?
Because they're not on the floor plan.
Because they're below the view range. In the Properties dialog box, scroll down to the View range and click on the Edit button. View range Edit. In the dialog that opens in the Primary Range section, set the bottom offset to -1 foot. Also set the level cut plane to -1 foot. And what happened?
They come back.
They showed back up. They didn't get any taller or any shorter. We just changed our view range.
If you click away.
Click away from the column so that you have the properties that says floor plan. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is actually add some beams in here. It's a fairly simple thing to do. Item 1, on the Structures panel of the Structures tab, click the Beam button as shown in figure 8.34. So we go to Structures, we have columns, we have trusses, we have braces, we have a beam system, and we have beams. We're just going to put a single beam in for right now, so we'll start there. Don't worry about saving your model. click the Load Family button. Browse to structural framing still. Okay. Load Family, structural framing, still. And we want to load a HSS 6x6x5/8. And you might be saying, well, but we already have that loaded, don't we? This is a beam, not a column, so it's a different orientation. So you have to load it for both orientations. You hit OK. Alright. Pick the first point at column E1, which is buried in the corner of the wall. Pick the second point at exterior column F1. We're going to click here, we're going to click here, and we're actually, because we didn't have chain selected, we're going to have to go and pick this button again. We'll do beam, we'll start there, and we'll go there. And you want to do this on both sides, but since we know it's symmetrical, I'm going to take those beams and I'm going to mirror them. And hopefully everything lines up. And I'll go into 3D view just to show you what we've done here. We have taken this column and made it shorter, and we've added a couple beams. All right. So I'm going to wrap it up there for today before we get into beam systems, which we'll do in the next class session.